So you were the writer for Lamordia, which is actually like one of my favorite of all time in Ravenloft as far as domains go.
Yes.
What is it about Lamordia that you love?
So I really loved the Darklord of Lamordia's Viktra Mordenheim, who is uh, a doctor, a sort of flesh warping doctor who is all into experimenting about the spark of life and what it is that gives flesh suits their animation. And she's completely amoral. She's a really, really interesting, fascinating character in that, you know, feelings have no meaning to her, and she's all about experimenting and finding, ways to get that spark of life. She's playing God, right? She's very much the Victor Frankenstein of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from the 1800s, right? It's that legacy of a type of character, and so her being the Dark Lord of that realm really kind of just gives everything a very creepy vibe to it. And we're already dealing with a setting that is very steampunk, there's a lot of tendrils of cosmic horror in it as well, in the wilderness area. The movie The Thing could probably be set in rural Lamordia, because there are all of these sort of unknown, unspoken entities and powers that are referenced in that section. So there are just so many things that you can do within that umbrella of this very creepy, completely amoral, obsessed scientist who, has no regard for the sanctity of life and sees herself as being, the giver and the taker of life, as she sees fit to her whims on her slab. And there's a lot of plot threads going on about what she's obsessed with and what she's trying to find. There's a specific thing that she's trying to find, and we go into her backstory quite a bit into the book. But it's really interesting because there's just so many stories that you can tell about that sort of obsession and the amorality approach. But also, the genre being so big, there are lots of weird, creepy horror, steampunk, and cosmic horror things that you can do in there as well. So it's really deep and vast and fun.
Why do you think we're so obsessed with this type of horror? Like after, Frankenstein, it seemed to feel a niche after that novel was published. That's just kind of it's just really enticing. It's really evocative, and it's like that where horror meets science. And I've never let go of loving that. I love
Yeah.
constructs. I love the idea of someone who doesn't know who they really are. I
Mhm.
love the idea of reborn. Like, what is about it that kind of gets its claws into people, do you think?
I really think that it's because there is that huge element of the unknown, right? Science is this vast ocean, and we only know a little bit about the first couple inches of the depths. And there are still things, in 2021, things that science cannot explain, things that the human brain doesn't understand. And I think that's scary to people because when you sort of when you have that space to think about how do you maybe explain the unexplainable, your mind starts to really churn and you come up with these horrible solutions, right? Because nature is super scary. Like space horror, for example, is one of my favorite genres. And I think that that is similarly super scary, as far as survival horror goes, because it's like the human body is so fragile, right? You need all of this perfect environment in which to survive, and if you don't have any of those things, the things that happen to you are just horrible. You don't have oxygen, you choke it and die terribly. You don't have you don't have water, you don't have food, you don't have the perfect sort of sets of gases around, and your brain just explodes, right? It's like that scene in Total Recall, and the original Total Recall, where their eyes are bugging out and their faces are shrinking in, and it's body horror. That stuff is body horror. So I think just the unknown and the realization that every life and the human body is just so fragile is really compelling to a lot of people, and we're constantly trying to answer that question. We're constantly trying to answer what happens when we encounter these things that we can't explain, and what's the result, and the result is often really, really scary.
Have you ever gotten a chance to play a reborn or a character that has kind of that background, that almost like Frankenstein-like background that is?
Oh gosh, I haven't played a character that's had that background, but I've definitely worked on things and had writing projects where there's an element of the character doesn't know what's happened to them to get into a certain place, or the character has got some kind of big blank spot, and that is also a way of sort of diving into that psychological horror, right? Of like, what has happened to me through this chunk of time that I don't remember or that I don't have evidence from, and how do I fill in those pieces? And maybe what have I become, right? Because I think the biggest fear is that you don't understand yourself, that you have become something that's out of your own control, and having a character having done things that they don't remember is a really scary thing, because then they have got to reckon with what they've done and the repercussions of that.
You being sort of the resident Lamordia expert now, what's your advice? What's your advice for players who want to start out in Lamordia?
Oh, so there's lots of really cool hooks that we put into the Lamordia section. That's one of my favorite things about this book, is all of the random seeds that are placed in the form of tables in many cases, but just seeded throughout the narrative of the book. We give you all of these options for playing these types of stories in Lamordia. And one of the most fun things about horror is that the players don't know what's happening, right? So we give you as the DM all of these options to place the characters into Lamordia so that they don't know what's happening and they've got to actually discover it. Ravenloft works, as you know, in the way that, the mists just sort of ebb and flow, and they might take you to these different realms from somewhere that's completely unrelated. And so showing up in Lamordia, there are these options that are like, oh, you wake up and you're on Dr. Mordenheim's slab. And for example, this is one of my favorite threads within the book. You have completely lost all semblance of what you would recognize as yourself. You have become a reborn. She has taken away your humanity, or whatever, whatever character you're playing, she's taken that away from you. And she says, I have this mission. You have got to go recover something that's very important to me. You've got to go accomplish this thing that I know that you can accomplish. And when you do that, then I'll give you your body back. Then I'll give you yourself back. So just this idea that like, your consciousness could be implanted into a reborn, and you can kind of see your own flesh suit over there in the corner, and you've got, to try to get your own humanity back. I think that's really interesting, and those are the types of things that we are exploring in the Ravenloft book, and in Lamordia in specific.
During all this process, what was the most exciting thing for you in the writing of it? Because you're clearly very passionate about Lamordia. And you didn't even know that you were going to be full time. You didn't know you were going to get hired at Wizards of the Coast at the time when you started all of this. So that's kind of like a wonderful way to begin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really cool coincidence that I worked on this book as, very similarly to the lead, Wes Schneider, who loves Ravenloft and has been a fan of Ravenloft for decades at this point. For me, it was also this labor of love, because I'm this big horror fan. I know lots about Ravenloft. Wes and I have had nerd discussions late into the night about all of the different concepts involving in Ravenloft. So I was just excited to work on this project and put my sticky little fingerprints all over the next generation of Ravenloft books. And then it turns out that now I am a designer, senior designer at Wizards of the Coast, and I get to see this thing that was this passion project to go out into the world and see it from that platform is a really great sense of accomplishment, I think.
What advice do you have? What do you think is key to a setting like Lamordia? Because there are so many domains within Ravenloft, but there is like a very core theme to Lamordia itself. Whether you are a player or whether you're a dungeon master, what's like key elements to that story, and how even down to like how do you describe things to make it creepy and upsetting?
Yeah. So the key elements of Lamordia, I think, are definitely those genre hooks that we've put into the setting, right? So there's the mad science, there's the amorality of the scientists who are playing God and those who would want to get into her sphere. There's that. So there's that sort of decayed type of learning. There are universities there, right, in which you can pursue types of science that might not necessarily be considered okay, but that there are professors who advance that and encourage that type of behavior, because the whole place is tainted, right, by the influence of Dr. Mordenheim. So there's those genre hooks, but there's also, the gritty sort of urban horror fantasy that's going on. We've got, giants, stacks that are belching smoke, and the things that are happening within those forges are vaguely horrifying, with the thought that they could be, there could be the mass creation of flesh golems that are going on. There could be, things being done, right, to achieve stuff that then ends up like exploiting this, underclass of individuals. And then there's also the wilderness, right? And it's a very cold, bleak atmosphere. So once you get out of those steampunk cities, once you get out of that urban horror setting, you're starting to get more into, well, now it's the unknown of the wilderness rather than the unknown of the human mind. So there are things that you can do out in the wastelands where, the ice is the cold, sort of, you're at the mercy of the cold and the frozen tundra, and there are potentially dark powers that are unknown, that are cosmic in scale, that are affecting sort of the ebb and the flow of the things that happen there, and you're stumbling upon all of these evidences of these terrible influences, like ships that are impaled on the ice. There's a mountain range that may or may not look like, the giant bones of old creatures, of these elder creatures who even knows what it was that they came from. So, I think just kind of like getting a grasp in your mind's eye of how all of that kind of fits together and the types of stories that you can tell is sort of the basic part of setting something in Lamordia.
If you want to watch more videos on Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, we've got a whole lot more coming up. If you want to support the channel, you can check out the Amazon affiliate link in the description and purchase the book, or just like, subscribe, share with your friends, and leave some comments down below. I love talking about Ravenloft, so I'm going to keep doing it. I hope you guys are having a great day. Thank you so much for watching.